I just wanted to say that we are learning tonight. I better check that I get the right names. Okay, we're going to be learning. It's on the thing. We're learning tonight for Bruria Bas Shlomo, that is Bernice Willick, Le'ilu Nishmasa. We're in her Shiva still, and also during the Shiva of Yisrael Moshe Ben and Mr. Tivon in South Africa. That is Adi Tivon and Ariel Tivon's father. And in Hashem, we should add lots of schus to their aliyah of the neshamas.
Okay. For all the other cholim and for whoever else.
Amen. Amen.
It's a time of light. It's a time of miracles. Tonight's night number 5. So it's the night where we're crossing over into more light rather than less light. We're over to the side of, we already got 5 out of 8. So let's keep davening that we should see Yeshua wherever it's needed.
Amen.
Okay, so I don't know how many of you tuned in a year ago for this class, so I'm going to hope that even if some of you did, I'm going to repeat some thoughts from last time just because it is relevant for now. But I want to talk a little bit about, it's true that we're approaching Rosh Chodesh, but I don't want to leave this month of Kislev behind without maximizing what there is to grab out of this month. And I want to talk about the last few days of Chanukah, because these are such powerful days, and we've got not so long left to kind of grab this unusual once a year kind of light. So let's try and maximize on that. So for those of you who are familiar with this idea, forgive me because I'm going to give an introduction to this idea again, even if you've heard this, but there is an idea that every month has a unique kind of blessing or unique kind of energy or unique kind of godly light that comes from above. And we have a monthly opportunity to make ourselves a vessel for that godly light. We have an opportunity to kind of tune in to what energy that month is bringing us and grow through that month. So the way that the Jewish calendar works is not that every time we celebrate a Chag, it's commemorative. It's not meant to be that here we are again doing the same thing again like we did last year and the year before and the year before, but rather as we move through each month, we're meant to be very conscious of the growth opportunity that that month provides us with. And if we sort of know where to plug in our charger, if we know what power it is that's coming out of this month, then we really can be changed people every time we walk out of whatever month it is. So that by the time we come to that month again next year, we're in a totally different place spiritually. We've grown through that month because of what we chose to draw out of that month. So what it means is that the way that the Jewish calendar was created is not just this commemorative idea where every year we're remembering like sort of biblically what happened in our history, but rather that at the very beginning of the creation of the world, every single day, really every single week, but if we don't want to work so microcosmically because that's quite an intense way to live, then at least monthly, Hashem invested every month with a certain kind of power. And because of the power invested in that month, certain events were able to happen. So in other words, the Chagim, the way they fall, couldn't have happened at any other time. Chanukah could only happen throughout Kislev. And, Pesach could only happen at Nisan because of the power that was already instilled in that month. And the reason that's such a powerful idea for us in terms of our own personal growth is because it means that when we enter that month, that same opportunity for growth and that same energy is available to us as was available at that original time that allowed that story, whatever it was, to happen. So in other words, there's something now in this month of Kislev that we can tune into that's as relevant as whatever happened for the Chashmonaim, whatever happened in the story of Chanukah. We're able to tune into that as well and use that in our own personal lives. I think probably the example I always give, because it's just kind of the most tangible, but just to make this idea real, is, for example, the concept of Pesach, right? The idea that the Jews could never have gone free in any other month. It was the only month that could have gone free, and that was the energy that was instilled in that month, this kind of energy of freedom. And for us in 2021 or whenever it is, for more recent times, what that means is that when you're sitting at your Seder, the concept is that even though you may not be feeling sort of in slavery, as if we don't have a paro with a whip standing above us, every single one of us is certainly going to be limited from something that's not allowing us to reach our ultimate greatest potential. So those are the things we want to think about on Pesach is, how do I tune into this energy of freedom or, whatever it is that allows me to meet my greatest self? So here we are in Kislev, and I want to talk about some of the ideas behind what energy, what power, what light, what godly light is Kislev offering us. How can we draw that out of Kislev? And how can we use these last few days of Chanukah to really fuel us for the months ahead? There's something that we can take out of this that's not just for this time alone. This is going to project into the next year till we come around to Kislev again. So some of the hints that we get, and some of you may or may not recall this, from a year ago, come from a book called Sefer Yetzirah, which is kind of like the original Kabbalistic work. And it gives us some sort of hints on how to tune into this month according to various symbols or signs that are associated with the month. So for example, every single month has a Hebrew letter associated with it. Every single month has an order of Hashem's name associated with it. Every single month has a tribe associated with it, because there's 12 tribes. Every month has a color associated with it. Every month has like a horoscope associated with it, a zodiac, a picture and an idea behind that picture. And many, many other things, not all of which we'll get to go into tonight. But all of those things are kind of hints of how to draw out the essence of this month. So I just want to briefly jot through a few of those as ways to kind of give us a hint as to how to tune into what this month has to offer. So the first thing that we see is that this month is created with, or is associated with, the letter Samach. Now in Hebrew, when we look at the Hebrew letters, we know that there's great mystical significance, and they're classes and classes in and of themselves on the Hebrew letters, because a Hebrew letter is not just like the ABC. It's the way the letter's structured. It's whether it's open, it's whether it's closed, it's whether above the line or below the line, that gives it sort of great mystical content. And also the words that are used to refer to the letter give us some significance as to what that letter is about. So for example, the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which is Beit, we'd say the most similar word is Bayit. Well, there's an association with a home and the fact that the Beit is open and the sides. And so there's some significance in the actual word that's used to refer to that letter. So if we look at the word Samach, which is the letter that created this month, the concept of Samach, and if you think of the closest word to it, it's not the word Sameach, because that's not with the Samach, that's with a sin. So the word closest to this is Somech, which means to like rely on or be supported by. Now, maybe one of the most sort of like familiar places that word is mentioned is when we talk about Hashem as Samech Naflim, V'rafei Chalim, that Hashem sort of supports those who are falling and heals those who are ill. So interestingly, last month, the month before Kislev, which is the month of Cheshvan, was the month which was referred to as Mar Cheshvan, Bitter Cheshvan. Why? Because just before that month of Cheshvan, we stepped out of the month of Tishrei. And Tishrei is the month full of the high holidays. There's major spiritual intensity in that month. We've been davening and fasting and in shul and hanging out with Hashem a lot. And then all of a sudden we get to Cheshvan, where what's happening in Cheshvan? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You get a break from the Chagim, you get a break from cooking, you get a break from fasting and feasting, but it can feel like a real letdown because we've been in this really intense time and all of a sudden there's just nothing happening in that month. So it's referred to as Mar Cheshvan. Now tonight's class is not on Cheshvan, so I'm not going to dwell on this majorly, but the idea that I want to draw out is the fact that actually the opportunity in this potentially bitter month of Cheshvan is that the word Mar can be switched around to the word Ram, which means high and exalted, which means that actually the opportunity that exists in the month of Cheshvan is to somehow try work on what looks negative and depressing and try to switch it around so that it becomes high and exalted. Now, the letter that represents the month of Cheshvan, which is the month before this month, is the letter Nun. And if you're familiar with how the Hebrew letters look, the letter Nun can take one of two forms. Either it's a Nun like this, like a bent kind of Nun, or there's the Nun Sofit, which is like the last Nun at the end of a word, which is just one long line. And it tells us that in order to access a Cheshvan that is Ram, high and exalted, and not Mar, bitter and depressing, is that we want to be the long, straight Nun, not the bent Nun, because it says that Nun represents the word Nofel, which means to fall. Because in that winter month, you finish the Chagim, you finish the high and all the connection, and also it's when winter starts. So like the days are very dark, very early, it's a bit depressing. People are starting to like hibernate a little bit. And like that Nun, one might start sort of folding in on oneself, that you start drawing inward and it starts feeling a little bit dark and a little bit sad. So it says that the Nun is associated with the concept of Nofel, to fall. And that's the work we need to do in Cheshvan. Now that we've just been in the month of Kislev, and I've told you that the letter that represents this is the samach, which is somech. So it's interesting that this idea of somech noflim, like support those who are falling. It's interesting. If you came out of Cheshvan feeling like you were falling, feeling like that bent nun that's bending in on yourself, hibernating and feeling like it's dark outside and it's becoming winter and it feels like less spiritual connection. Well, this is the month of Samech Naflim, where Hashem is there to support you in your falling. In this month of miracle and light, one of the things that we need to learn to tap into in the month of Kislev is to allow ourselves to lean on and rely on and be supported by Hashem. And how do we rely on and be supported by Hashem? Well, partially, it's the recognition that we actually have an illusion that we control the world and that we're in charge of things. And it's letting go of that illusion and it's surrendering to that illusion. And really the deep idea behind that is trust. And we're going to look in a minute as to how that's actually shown to us throughout the month of Kislev because of the story of Chanukah. That's so inherent in that story is the idea of trust and letting go of this illusion that we control the world to really allow Hashem to kind of step into that space and hold us. So, if we look at the time that we're in, which again is always so relevant in terms of even seasons and what's happening around us, we become very in tune with time. All of time is relevant in terms of our spiritual growth. So if we look outside, we realize it's winter. Nothing looks like it's ever going to grow again. It looks very dark outside. It's dark in the morning. It's dark at night. For those of you who were not originally born in this country, I don't know if it takes a lifetime to ever get used to that concept. Okay. But so far, yes, it does seem to take a lifetime to get used to that concept. But this relates to the idea that in the Chanukah story, where we were at now, biblically, is the idea that it was a time that looked really hopeless and dark. It looked like nothing good was ever going to come out of this time. The situation didn't hold a lot of light, but in fact, it says that in that time of the greatest darkness, that's when sort of light came out. And why did light come out? Because they had trust. What do we refer to as the greatest miracle of Chanukah? This amazing oil that lasted for 8 days, right? They didn't know where to find this oil, and they unearthed this oil, and this oil ended up lasting for 8 days. But it says, you know what? It's an even bigger miracle than that. What's the bigger miracle? The bigger miracle is that they trusted that there was oil to look for in the first place, that they had hope, that there was something to actually seek. When you're in a really dark place, who would even think of looking for the oil? Everything looks so dark and depressing. What hope is there beyond what you see now? The real miracle was in the fact that they sought the oil out in the first place. That is a very deep level of trust, to know that even in the darkest times, Hashem's somewhere behind, it may not be easily visible, but Hashem's there, is in the background waiting to bring light into the picture. So this concept of trust, of somech, of the what happened during the Chanukah story and us being able to relate to this, being able to rely on Hashem and allow Hashem to support us, even in a time where it doesn't look obvious that anything good is going to come out of this. Now, there's always a body part or a sense of the body that's associated with the month. This is also from this Sefer Yetzirah, which gives us sort of hints as to how to tap into this concept. And the sense of the body for this month is the sense of sleep. Now, whenever this kind of concept comes up, you should know that it's not coincidental if during that month there's a concept that comes up that suddenly feels very relevant for you. So, for example, in the month where, I don't know, it's like got to do with your eyes, and suddenly everybody says, oh, that's so weird. I've been trying to get an optician appointment and I only managed to get one this month, or I've had conjunctivitis that I can't get rid of, whatever it is. So in this month, where the concept is the concept of sleep, you might be thinking, well, it's really interesting because I haven't slept much this month, or I can't stop sleeping because it's winter and it's dark all the time and I always feel so sleepy. Or if you feel that something in your sleep has been affected, that's not coincidental if that happened to come up for you in this month, because the sense of sleep is the sense of this month. Now, what is the sense of sleep? How does that connect to this concept? So the truth is that on the highest level, sleep is very deeply connected to the idea of trust. Why is that? Because when we have trouble sleeping, what does that really, really relate to on the deepest level? Somewhere there's a bit of a lack of trust, because if we had ultimate trust in Hashem, what we'd be able to do is to say, whatever problems and worries I have, Hashem, I need sleep to restore me. So I'm going to just trust that you'll hold all this while I'm sleeping and sort it out, okay? And I'm going to go to bed now so that I can get a good night's sleep. Now, usually what happens is we're worrying about something or fearful about something or anxious about something. We'll spend our night worrying about that thing. But you know, obviously, that you're worrying about that thing is not making it any better, right? It's not curing any problems and it's not solving anything. It's just making you not sleep. So the concept of trust would be, Hashem, I'm handing it over to you. I give it over to you. I need to sleep now. Can you just hold the world like you anyway do? And I'm just under the illusion that I do, right? This is the concept of trust that feeds into this idea of sleep as well. The other idea that runs through this month of Kislev and again connects to this concept of trust is something that we call Mesiras Nefesh, which means sort of like self-sacrifice, being willing to go above and beyond, do something that's out of our comfort zone and that doesn't sort of feel comfortable for us. And this idea we learn from the Chashmonaim, this story we learn from this battle that takes place during Chanukah. Now, this battle is an utterly illogical battle. It makes zero sense, okay? Because when we look at the fight that happens, you know, the Greek army was a very established military, you know, precise military organized, you know, army. We're not just talking about like a bunch of people who got together. This was a scary army that nobody would want to face. And who is it that faces them? Really, it's Matityahu, who's a Kohen Gadol, and his sons, who are Kohanim. These are not like trained military people. These are like skinny, scrawny, sun-deprived yeshiva bochrim. They've never been in war before. Like, what do they know about this? Oh, they must be out of their minds to present themselves in this situation and say, you know, Hashem, we're here to fight. But with ultimate trust and with ultimate Mesiras Nefesh, they put themselves into a position that's extremely uncomfortable and extremely out of their comfort zone, because they see that there's a bigger picture. What's the bigger picture? The bigger picture is if you look through every Torah story and beyond, because even in modern days, in every story, there's always someone who wants to kill us, okay? In Pesach, it's Paro. In Purim, it's Haman. And up until recent times, we've had the Hitlers and we've had the Ahmadinejads and we've had whoever else it is that's after us, right? There's always someone. That has been our history since the beginning of creation up until today. There's always someone that's out to kill us. And in fact, I think that's quite intrinsically tied in with why it is that we've survived, right? Because we've always been a threatened nation who was born fighting. Now, who is the enemy in the story of Chanukah? It's the Greeks. But there's a slightly different turn to this because the Greeks didn't, in fact, want us dead. They didn't mind us being alive. What they did mind was the way that we lived. And this was not a physical war. Well, it's represented by a physical war, but we know that everything physical is just a manifestation of something that's happening in the spiritual realm, which is that although this presented as a war, this was really a spiritual war. This was a spiritual war between the ethos of the Greek people and the ethos of the Jews. And when the Chashmonaim stood up for this, what they were saying was, we trust that Hashem wants our way of life to be the way of life that survives and not what the Greeks stand for. And even though this is so out of our comfort zone to be standing here in a ridiculous war where we are the few against the many, the weak against the strong, we're going to put ourselves out there. Because we believe, we trust, we have faith. We are, you know, we know that Hashem is going to pull us out of this. And indeed he did, because if you look at who has survived through the generations, again, there's so many, you know, massive empires that existed throughout our history as a Jewish people that are gone. There are no Greek people in that way anymore. Of course, there are people who come from Greece, but that's not who the Greek people were, this nation, this army. And there isn't a Roman Empire anymore like that. All of them have died out, and us, this tiny little dot on the map of a people, have somehow survived through all of these experiences. So what is it that they took such great offense to in terms of the way that we live our lives, that they wanted to get rid of us spiritually? They wanted to spiritually annihilate us. They didn't mind if we remained alive, but they wanted to spiritually annihilate us. So what is it that got on their nerves so much about us? So, you know, we live in a world that follows a natural order, and we rely on that natural order, which is why things like COVID throw us so much, because all of a sudden things are not following the order that they're supposed to fall. Everything's unreliable, like what's going to happen next? But as human beings, we rely on there being some form of natural order in the world. So for example, we need there to be like Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. The days have to follow each other. The seasons have to follow each other. Day needs to follow night. There needs to be some kind of order to the natural world. It's what we rely on as human beings. It's what makes us know that the world's running the way that it's supposed to run. And in the mystical world, where numbers represent something spiritual, the number 7 represents this natural world, this world of natural order where day follows night and seasons follow each other and Monday follows and Tuesday follows Monday. So if you look at what 7 represents in the order of the world, you'll see that it's always to do with the natural world. So there's 7 colors in the rainbow, there's 7 days of the week, there's 7 different directions, including the center, there's 7 basic music notes. So 7 is represented by anything that has reached completion within this natural world. So it's sort of like our earthly accomplishments. So when you get to the end of a day and you've been successful in whatever you were supposed to achieve in that day, or you've gotten to the end of a week and managed to tick off all your tasks, that was like a 7-day or a 7-week where you've managed to complete whatever you're supposed to complete in this natural physical world. Now, beyond 7, there's the number 8. And what does the number 8 represent? Well, if 7 is the physical world, then 8 is the metaphysical world. It's the supernatural world. It's the world above this physical world. So it's the world that can't be intuited by our 5 senses. You can't necessarily see it or smell it or taste it because it's the world that you're sensing through your soul. So it's the kind of things that are represented that are not so quantifiable. It's things like the power of love and connection. It's the things, and again, during the time of COVID, I think has been a good test for that, where people haven't seen each other, but relationships can still be deeply connected and can last. It's the power of a person overcoming a unimaginable feat and not imagining that they're going to get to the other side and see the light again. That's the power of 8. It's actually a couple standing under the chuppah because, and please God, all couples should be able to stand under the chuppah when they're supposed to at the right time with all their family surrounding them. When you stand under that chuppah, that represents 8, because that's not just about a man and a woman standing under the chuppah together. It's about infinity. It's about what they can create together and what's going to come out of them. So that is tapping into the concept of 8. Now, so 8 is our connectivity. 8 is our spirit. 8 is our soul. And 8 is what the Greeks took massive offense to, because the Greeks absolutely and totally lived a life representing 7. We know about the Greeks that they were all about physicality, all about what the body represents, the Olympics, physical prowess, strength. That's who they were. And we represent something far above and beyond that. And that was deeply offensive to them. The world of 8 really bothered them. And the honest truth is that in some ways, I think this is representative of what anti-Semitism is, which is that what the world takes great issue with, as with us as a people, is that we bring 8 into the world. And 8 is moral consciousness. And 8 is values. And the world sometimes gets annoyed that we're bringing that concept to the fore. What do we need 8 for? We're very happy in a world of 7. What are you trying to make us feel guilty about all the time? We don't want a moral conscience. So it keeps us on our toes, because our job is to constantly be bringing 8 into a world that is heavily immersed in 7. Wherever you look, it's about 7. It's about this earthly world. And we as a Jewish people are here to turn 7s into 8s. We're here to turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. We have these constant daily, opportunities to be investing in the world that's happening around us and finding ways to upgrade 7 into 8. And that's what the Greeks couldn't bear about us. So it wasn't us that they wanted to kill. It was our 8 that they wanted to kill. If they could just get rid of our 8, they would have been okay with us being around. And that's what this war was about. That's what Matisyahu and the rest of them understood in this concept, is that when we stand against each other, this is not one warrior standing opposite the other. This is 7 standing against 8. And our job is to make sure to prove that 8 will always stay in the world. And in fact, here we are in Kislev at the time of Chanukah, and we know that Chanukah lasted for 8 days. It's telling us we did survive. Here we are. Look at this. We crossed over into 8. We were the ones that won this war. But the way that we continue to win this war and continue to bring light into the world is to constantly look for ways that we can uplift and upgrade 7 into 8. So one of the things that we need to be thinking about as we're lighting our Chanukah candles and we're watching those Chanukah candles burn is, where are we maximizing on opportunities in our own life to turn 7 into 8? Where can we upgrade 7 into an 8? Are there places where we're allowing it to just kind of stop at 7 and not cross over into 8, whether that's with our personal relationships, our relationship with God, turning things into an 8. You don't have to be standing inside a shul and davening. There's the minute you find meaning, the minute you find godliness, the minute you find divinity in something, in anything, the minute you realize that Hashem is in the picture, you've just turned a 7 into an 8. And that's a constant opportunity. And that's what this time of year is here to remind us is, yes, it's true, we're not living in a time of a battle and a war like that, but that war hasn't ended. That war continues in a spiritual sense. We are surrounded by a world of 7, and it's not an easy battle to find a way to wade through that 7 to reach the 8. That's our job. That's our privilege. That's who we are as a people. We are the people of 8. And we need to remind ourselves about that constantly. And the Chanukah lights are what's there to remind us of that. To look at those Chanukah lights and remind ourselves that we constantly need to keep on merging 7 with 8. And are we doing that enough in our own personal life? And for everyone, that's going to mean something different. And in fact, on the 8th night of Chanukah, we call the 8th night of Chanukah Zot Chanukah, which translates into, now this is Chanukah. This is Chanukah. This is what Chanukah is about. Those 7 days before were kind of like a build up to this 8th day. But the 8th day is the day that shows you what this whole story was about. We had to get beyond 7 into the world of 8. And when you enter the world of 8, well, Zot Chanukah, that's what it's all about. And in fact, we know that there's something powerful to daven for on every night of Chanukah. And on the 8th night of Chanukah, which is the night of the supernatural, it's the night you daven for anything and everything. It's the night of miracles. It's the night above nature. It's the night above 7. So it's the night where you want to tap into everything. Daven for whatever there is to daven for. Stand in front of your candles till they burn out. And don't stop davening. That's Zot Chanukah. That's crossing over into the realm of 8. Now, there is a concept that you're very lucky, because this is right at the end of Kislev. So this is much harder when you catch this right at the beginning of Kislev. And some of you may have heard this idea before, that there is this concept that for those who manage not to complain the whole way through the month of Kislev, it says great miracles will happen for you. Now, lucky that you didn't hear this at the beginning of Kislev if you haven't ever heard this idea before, because it's not easy. But here you are in the last few days of Kislev. You have a few days left to exercise this. But this exercise is something that gives you great light for the months ahead. Because what does it mean to not complain? So now it doesn't mean that every time you're going to complain, you bite your tongue and you spend the whole of Kislev not talking. What are you supposed to do? What does it mean to not complain? So really what the exercise means is, when a complaint comes to mind, when something that looks dark and that looks like, you can't find the good in it, you need to turn it over and find the light side of it. You need to find the good side of what it is that you're complaining about. In other words, it's engendering gratitude. Because instead of that thing triggering like, oh, and this, and everything's bad, right? We're like, what good can I find in this situation that actually initially is really triggering a bad response from me? But how can I find something good in this? Now, if we were able to look at every single thing that happens to us that comes across as negative and find the light side of it and find the good side of it and find, in fact, the part of it that makes us feel grateful, then we're going to be very different people by the end of this month. We're going to be channeling a lot of gratitude. So there's a lot of the concept of gratitude actually surrounding Chanukah, the idea that we're thinking about the things, not just that are lacking, but the things that if we can't see them necessarily obviously, then we want to tune into them. Because this idea, as it says, that when you trust and when you're willing to rely on Hashem and when you're willing to surrender control of the world, that's the vessel that you're creating that allows miracles to happen. And the reason it allows miracles to happen is because so long as you're under the illusion that you're controlling the world, you wouldn't even be able to be tuned into miracles, because you run the world and you hold the world up. The minute you realize Hashem has a bigger picture, do your bit and then surrender, then that is the space within which miracles happen. So when you're looking for the good in things and not complaining about things and looking to tune into Hashem's running the world here, it might not be obvious in this minute, there's something bigger in this picture. When you're able to tune into that, that's where the bracha and that's where the miracle comes from. So I challenge you to try that for the last few days of Kislev, to try tune into that idea of the not complaining, but not just not complaining, to be able to tune into the idea of actually looking for the good. Now, when we talk about this idea of Chanukah being about light and miracles, what is the light that we are talking about? So Joe introduced this by mentioning this idea of this Or HaGanuz. What is this Or HaGanuz? I don't know if any of you are familiar with this idea, but we know. Now, it's interesting that there's not a huge amount of sources about the mystical details of Chanukah. In other words, we know the halachas and how we're supposed to celebrate Chanukah and the story behind it, but up until about 450 years ago, and the sort of additions of the Arizal and those who lived during that time, who gave us much more mystical insight specifically to what Chanukah is about, we've been given more insight in more recent times. In other words, the Arizal, and if you know anything about the mystics who lived at that time, were able to kind of come into contact with ideas that have sort of enhanced our ability to tap into what Chanukah is about. And one of these ideas is that it says in the Talmud Yerushalmi, it mentions something about the concept of light, which doesn't look like it directly connects to Chanukah, but actually has a very deep and beautiful connection to Chanukah, because it talks about something called Or HaGanuz, which is translated as concealed light. Now, what is this concealed light? We'll try and get to the bottom of what it actually is in a second, but where do we find it presenting itself? It says from the very beginning of the world, we know that there's this idea that when Hashem creates the world, he says, Vayehi Or, and there's light. Now, the truth is that light, the way we know it, a visible light that we see, is only created on day 4 of creation. The sun, the moon, the stars, the luminaries are only created on day 4. So it tells us that from the beginning of creation until day 4, there was another light that existed in the world, and it was called Or HaGanuz. It was called concealed light. And there was something so powerful about this light that after those first 3 days that it existed, Hashem withdrew it from the world and is keeping that light aside until Mashiach comes. We have no access to that light again. Now, in a second, we'll talk about what exactly that light is. There is an idea that actually says that light came into the world again for 3 more days over the beginning of over Friday and Shabbos, because Shabbos itself asked Hashem to please shine this light just over Shabbos, that the first Shabbos ever, at the beginning of the creation of the world, should have this opportunity to have this super powerful light, and then it would again never be in the world again. But let's just talk about what's commonly understood, these first 3 days of this unusual light shining that then got withdrawn from the world, and we don't have continued access to it. So it says, if this light shone from the beginning of the creation of the world till day 4, when the luminaries were created, and it was overtaken by a more obvious light that we understand in the physical world that we live in, then it must have been a light that shone on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, because already on Wednesday, the sun, moon, and stars were created. So in other words, at a superficial glance, it would seem that light shone for 72 hours and then was taken over by a different light. But in fact, most commentaries say that although it seems obvious that it shone for 72 hours, and although it wasn't an obvious light the way we relate to light, there is this concept which was brought into the world at the same time as light was created, which is Vayehi Erev, Vayehi Boker. There's night and there's day. In other words, there must be a distinction between when light shines and when light doesn't shine. There has to be a time of day, whatever that meant at that time, where light is shining, and then there has to be a time where that light stops. Now, if we go according to that idea, then that would mean that this Or HaGanuz, this concealed light, didn't shine for 72 hours, because there had to be parts of those 24 hours that it was shining and parts that it wasn't. So our most common understanding of that would be that the light shines for 12 hours a day, and then it doesn't shine for 12 hours a day. So according to that understanding, we would understand that this light shone for 12 hours of every one of those 3 days, which means the light shone for 36 hours. This Or HaGanuz is most commonly understood to have shone for 36 hours at the beginning of the creation of the world, and then was withdrawn from the world and will not be accessed again until the end of the world and until Mashiach's arrival. How does that connect to us and now and Chanukah? Well, where does the number 36 present itself over Chanukah? In the 36 candles of the menorah. From day 1 till day 8 of Chanukah, if you count all the candles that you light, minus the shamas, because the shamas is just the sort of like lighter. If you count day 1 is 1 candle, day 2 is 2 candles, day 3 is 3 candles. If you count those all together, that gets us to 36 candles. Now, why is that relevant? That's a nice correlation, but why is that relevant? So the mystics tell us that with every light that you light on Chanukah, with every candle that you light on Chanukah, you are accessing 1 hour of the Or HaGanuz. You are accessing 1 hour of the concealed light that was brought into the world at the beginning of creation, and we have no way to access again until Mashiach comes, except for this amazing window of time called Chanukah, where you have an opportunity to light what looks like a flame, but what you're really drawing down into the world is Or HaGanuz. It's concealed light. So if you were to light every candle of every night of Chanukah, you are re-experiencing 36 hours of this original concealed light that has no other way of coming into the world. And in fact, it says that, I think it's the Shomer Amunim who says this, that there is a greater light that comes from the menorahs that we light today than the light that came from the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash, in the temple. Why is that? Because in the days of the Beis HaMikdash, there was one beautiful menorah. In today's day and age, in every home, there's more than one menorah. And in every corner of the world, there are menorahs. And there's menorahs being lit in South Africa and London and America and Mexico and Chile and the Netherlands and Australia. And they're being lit at different times of day because of the time difference. So can you imagine the Or HaGanuz that's being channeled into the world during those 8 days over those 24 hours of each day? This incredible, deep, concealed, mystical light that's coming into the world through hundreds and thousands of candles. There's a very deep power to that. Now we need to figure out, what is the deep power to it? What is this concealed light? What is this Or HaGanuz all about? So it says, if you look at the light that was created on day 4 of creation, this visible, obvious light that we know about, the sun, the moon, and the stars, what brings physical light into the world. Then the light that came before that, the concealed light, is a spiritual light. We're not talking about a physical concept. We're talking about a spiritual concept. And how does it explain to us what the spiritual concept is? What is this concealed light? So if revealed light is obvious, physical, the bright light that comes from a bulb, it says that spiritual hidden light is associated with our intellect. And the way it describes it is, it says, for any of you familiar with the concept of the Sfirot, which is for another class altogether, right, is that we have 3 Sfirot which are associated with our intellect. They're the first 3. The Sfirot are translated as like emanations, ways of Hashem bringing light into the world. The first 3 of those are associated with our intellect, which is called Chochmah, Bina, and Da'at. Doesn't matter what each one of them individually are. I mean, it does, but it's a different discussion, but that's not relevant necessarily to now. But if you're going to put them all into one category with each other, never mind what's different about each one of those levels of the intellect, it would translate into a way of understanding the world. So if you want to know what concealed light is, it's something to do with the way that we understand the world. Concealed light is our understanding of the world around us. So what are we tapping into when we light these candles that has something to do with our intellect and the way that we process the world? So it says that when we try to tune into something and we don't understand it, you know, when you have a feeling of like there's something that's, especially when this is a Torah concept, so when there's a concept in front of you that you just can't like break through, you don't get it, you can't understand why you can't understand it, that is because for you, for whatever reason, the Or HaGanuz is not shining on that particular thing. Okay, so here's an example of that. When we talk about the Arizal, this great mystical mind who allowed us to be introduced to great Kabbalistic concepts that we, as mere mortals, or I'll speak for myself, as mere mortals, wouldn't be able to access, that's because this Or HaGanuz shone for him in that area, and it doesn't shine for your average human being. But sometimes you have an opportunity, particularly if you're working on growing in different areas of Torah or your understanding of your connection to God, then sometimes that Or HaGanuz will be allowed in, will seep in, and you'll suddenly have like an understanding of something. You'll be like, I get it. It resonates. I'm understanding what this thing is talking about. It's been such a blockage for me until now. And for whatever reason, I get it. It sits right for me. In that moment, when it sits right for you, in that moment we understand it, that is a tiny little flicker of Or HaGanuz coming into the world, this concealed light that's channeled through our intellect that allows us to access different sort of concepts in the world. Now, what does this understanding look like? How are we meant to understand it? So it says that when we talk about trying to come to terms with what we are supposed to be seeing in this concealed light, how we understand things. It says, what's the deepest understanding that we need to have, even sometimes when things seem very dark for us, is that if we want to connect this actually to the very original idea of trust and of support and allowing ourselves to sort of lean on Hashem, is that the idea behind the Or HaGanuz, the idea behind these 36 hours of concealed light, and the idea behind this being an intellectual property, a spiritual light in the world, is that really what we're supposed to be looking at is the fact that we don't always understand everything that's happening in this world. And we don't always understand everything that's happening to us and why it's happening to us. And I don't say this lightly, because people have got very big challenges. So I'm not saying this in a flippant way. But part of this Or HaGanuz and this level of understanding is the understanding that whatever we experience and are experiencing in our lives is tailor-made for us. A level of trust that our life is actually very, very individually tailor-made for our personal growth. And even though we can't always see the light side of that, even though there may be instances and circumstances and challenges which look dark, there's going to be a light somewhere inside that, and it's purposely made for us. So when we go through life and say, like, when this bump in the road gets out of the way, I'll be able to go back to real life, we're forgetting the fact that actually this bump in the road is real life. That's exactly what real life is, that the bumps in the road are what make us us. And this Or HaGanuz, this concept of concealed light, is connecting to that idea, that Hashem is specifically sending us stuff that even though we may not understand it in the moment, we're having a trust that He's sending it to us for our personal growth. That's what we need. So what we're supposed to do when we stand by those Chanukah candles and bring 36 hours worth of concealed power light into the world that we cannot access any other way and won't be ours till the time of Mashiach. What we're supposed to be davening for and looking at those candles and thinking about is either the idea that Hashem, I implicitly trust you, I'm working on being somech on you and relying on you, and I want to, and I'm trying to tune into the idea that everything you send me is for my best and it's purposeful. And if I'm really having a hard time understanding that, then I'm also davening, Hashem, please help me to have clarity on where this is good for me. Please help me to see the light side of this. Right now it looks really, really, really dark. I don't know how to see the light here. Please, Hashem, help me tune into that light. Help me find a way to make this real in my life. Let this concealed light become a revealed light where I can obviously see it in this world. I don't want to wait till the world to come to be able to make some sense of this. I want to be able to see it for what it is right now. That's what we're trying to tune into during this time. So do not waste the last few days of lighting these Chanukah candles, because be aware of what it is that you're bringing into the world. And you know that when we light our Chanukah candles, we're supposed to sit there with those candles and do nothing else. It's not the time for catching up on social media or having a little schluff by the candles. We're supposed to look at those lights till like they blur in front of us. We're supposed to look into those lights and try draw down into this world what it is that they're bringing into the world. This concealed light, which is a spiritual light. It's not just a flame. It's something far beyond that. And we want to work on accessing that and bring it into the world. We have this once a year opportunity to draw this down to the world. And when Chanukah ends, on Zot Chanukah, on the last night that you light those 8 candles, can you imagine the power of 8 candles around the world, that everybody's bringing these final few hours of concealed light into the world? So no wonder it's a night of miracles above nature. You're drawing something down into the world that is super powered. And it's in fact why the time of Chanukah is going to exist even after Mashiach comes, because the world needs this light. We need to be able to bring this light down into the world. And it says, in fact, that on the first Chanukah, that the story of Chanukah happened, obviously wasn't the Chag of Chanukah, because it was when the actual event was happening. But it says that the year after, before it had been instituted as Chanukah, it says that the Chachamim, the sages of the time, around that time, felt this like light being drawn into the world, that there was a light trying to make its way into the world that doesn't come in here at any other point in time. And that's when Chanukah was instituted, that it was kind of opening the world up to this tiny glimpse of a deeper understanding of what the world is about. And that the reason it saved the time that Mashiach is going to come is because we won't have a full understanding on every aspect of our lives and why this happened and why that happened. We daven that Hashem makes it that obvious for us, that we'll be at a point where we can look back and say, oh, I get why that connected to that and that thing has to happen to me. But sometimes we have to wait a lifetime for that understanding. That's the light that's being held in the time of Mashiach that's going to shine absolute clarity onto our whole lifetimes, an understanding of why we had to experience everything we had to experience to become who we had to become. So we're trying to draw that light into the world now. Give me clarity, give me intellectual understanding now of this concept. Shine that into my life now, into my life now. That's the thing that we're kind of trying to access. And this idea is, in the same way as we said, you get miracles if you're not complaining. This is the idea of trying to draw light into dark places. And that's why often, this light, this Or HaGanuz, resides specifically in very dark places. And it's sometimes why we have to be drawn into dark places in order to find the light. In other words, if we were constantly moving through the light, we would never be able to draw this into the world. That often it exists in exactly the hardest spaces. That's the place where the Or HaGanuz lives. And that's the place that we need to kind of allow ourselves to be immersed into in order to draw out this kind of unusual, holy, otherworldly sort of light, that in the hardest places and the darkest places are actually the places that exist the most opportunity to find godliness and to find good and to find real, true, deep light. So as we approach the end of Chanukah, if we can bring any of these concepts for real into our lives and try to maximize on them now in these last few days of Chanukah, this is certainly something that will take us into the next month in a very different way spiritually. We'll be ready to greet what the next month has to offer us and the energy that the next month brings in. If we can get ourselves to this place of somech, of allowing ourselves to trust Hashem and rely on Hashem, let Hashem be somech noflim. If I feel I'm falling, let Hashem hold you up. Surrender, give up this idea that you control the world, you don't. And that means that on some level, that means let go of some of those anxieties and fears, because they're actually counterproductive. They're not doing anything for you. They're making you not sleep. Go to sleep and sleep deeply, trusting that Hashem runs the world. And if we're able to use this concept of Mesiras Nefesh, of self-sacrifice, in the same way as these Chashmonaim who put themselves in a place where it wasn't logical, it made no sense, there was no ways they were going to win this war. But what they were actually putting themselves in the place of was, this is the war between the 7 and 8. We represent 8. And that's what's going to exist long after the 7 is finished. If we're able to put ourselves in a place of discomfort, move out of our box, where as human beings, we are the most comfortable. It's most comfortable to be complacent. If we're able to stand up for what's real and put ourselves out there in a real way, that's what we have access to over the time of Chanukah. And of course, we want to think for ourselves about where we are elevating 7s into 8 in our own personal lives. And if we feel we're not elevating 7s into 8s enough, that's what we need to be working on, is where am I using opportunities constantly to turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. And this last idea, which is in these last few days, we want to light those candles, draw down that Or HaGanuz, draw down those 36 hours, unbelievable concealed light that only come into the world once a year, and use it for what it's there for, which is to get back to this idea of trust and Mesiras Nefesh, and believe that Hashem's running the world and gets the bigger picture, even though we don't always get the bigger picture, and trust that whatever's sent to us is sent to us for the right reasons, and use those candles and the time to daven at those candles, to ask Hashem to send us clarity for where the light side of the dark things are, to be able to tune into that. And of course, not to miss the opportunity of Zot Chanukah, which is on Sunday night, which is this end of this whole journey through 7 to this night of 8, which stands above all of that, to tune into this incredible power and to daven hard for miracles. I think I heard Rabbanit Shimon Mizrahi once say that you're supposed to cry until your tears make the candles blur and you can't properly see them in front of you. That's when you're like tuning in enough. So that's your exercise in these next few days, and certainly on the 8th night of Chanukah, is to be able to draw this unbelievably powerful light into the world. And please God, if we're all channeling this into this world, then very, very soon we should see that concealed light turn itself into revealed light and be merit, ultimate revelation and ultimate connection and ultimate ability to see what the world is really all about, and ultimate redemption. So I wish you all a special and meaningful last few days of Kislev, a special and meaningful last few days of Chanukah, and please God, that gives us the energy and the light and the miracles that we need to progress into the rest of the year.